Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission has ordered power distribution companies to install meters in all ministries, departments, and agencies of both federal and state governments. Now, before the end of the month of August, it gave the order in a regulatory order, which was issued to each of the 11 power distributors. According to the order, government pointed out that the responsibility for revenue collection from power consumers across the country was on the distribution companies. The Ministry of Power is one considered to be pivotal to revolutionizing Nigeria's economy, as electricity is the lifeblood of any business. Formerly merged with Works and Housing under the supervision of Babatunde Raji Fashola, power has now been separated from the trio. President Muhammadu Buhari last week appointed Engineer Saleh Maman as the Minister of Power. And in order to make more sense of the sector more effective, President Buhari last week signed 600 billion naira for the release of intervention funds for the power sector. Now, the release of 600 billion naira will make it the third key intervention so far carried out by the government after it officially handed over the distribution company and generation arms of the sector to private investors in November 2013. Michael Oluwagbemi is an energy analyst. He joins me now live from our Abuja studios. Mike, let's start this way. I want us to start by setting an agenda for the new minister. I know we have lots to talk about the power sector. What are the expectations from the new man taking over this very important sector, considering what we have below 4,000 megawatts for a country of almost 200 million people?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to once again be on your program. Definitely, you will agree with me that the expectations of Nigerians for the power sector is pent up and is high. No less because for far too long, Nigerians have been used to being promised and the government failing to provide succor to them in this sector. Let us recall that in 1999, we had a power minister, Bola Ige, who came in with all the energy and fervor to provide stable electricity, and no sooner that he resumed that he realized that the monster of the sector consumed this agenda. The same thing can be said of almost all the ministers since then. I mean, we've just been more or less, the more we see, the more we look, the less we see. It's often the case of 3 steps forwards and 4 or 5 steps backwards. So the expectations of Nigerians is very high. The current minister, luckily, maybe perhaps on a positive note, is not a stranger to the sector. He's a retired director from the sector at the state level. He was involved in many ways and many forms with one of the biggest, the earliest development of the biggest projects in Nigeria in the sector, which is the Mambila project. He's from a state that is central to the quest for Nigeria's diversification of Nigeria's energy sources going forward. So in many ways, I'm hopeful that at least given a technical person, an engineer of his nature, he will at least be able to hit the ground running. Hopefully, if he surrounds himself with the right set of people, takes the right advice, and focuses on the outcomes. I think ultimately Nigerians only care about the outcomes, they just want power. 4,000 megawatts is not enough to power Victoria Island, talk less of the whole of Nigeria. This country needs nothing less than 40,000 megawatts for us to have stable electricity. And to do that, the minister has to understand that he has to build a foundation towards achieving those targets that Nigerians have set for them. I have to also be very clear that Nigerians are not strangers and are not shy to pay for their own services. It's been well established in other sectors. So what Nigerians need is someone who will provide the service and then be able to request payment for that service. We've not been able to get that. We've been able to get more of the same subsidy-funded sector, and the subsidy going to the pockets of few people, often the owners of these discos, as you just explained in your last segment. And this continues on and on, and the people do not get the power. The owners of the disco keep all the benefits. They keep flying private jets going on vacations across the world, and the Nigerians don't have power. So the hard questions are being asked. I hope with the selection of this new minister, we can start focusing on Nigerians who need this power, who need this power to power their business, to power their homes, and also to get the results that we require in terms of electricity supply to Nigerians and businesses to create jobs.
Okay, very quickly, let's look at this recent intervention, 600 billion naira. And this is the third since 2013 when we, according to the government, handed over to private investors to run this sector. Now, we still have government intervening, nothing really to show for it. How does this come to you?
It leaves a very bad taste in the mouth of Nigerians. Nigerians do not own a vast majority of the stake in these companies anymore. 60% of the discos, except I think the Yola Disco is now owned by private sector operators. Yet Nigerians continue to subsidize their operation. I think this has to be the only business in the world where you are actually provided your commodity. You don't even produce your commodity, by the way. The GENCOs provide the commodity, and the Transco, that's the transmission company of Nigeria, transmits this commodity to these discos, and yet these discos are not able to take the commodity, they are not able to sell it, and they are not able to get the money back. I mean, what is it, rocket science? The commodity you're selling was provided to you, and then you're supposed to just collect the money back from the consumers by metering, and then you're supposed to give the money back to the entire sector. They can't even do that. And now what are we doing? The bystander, the end user, the Nigerian people, are now paying them for not providing power. This is going to be the third intervention. We're now going into almost 1.5 trillion naira in direct intervention to the discos. I saw in your segment that they are now being billed to pay back about 32, 34 billion. What's that? They've collected 1.5 trillion and they're going to pay 34 billion and we're supposed to be rejoicing? No, that's silly. And ultimately, the Nigerian people are the ones being scammed here. And I think it is time for the regulator, the Nigerian Regulatory Commission, to step up. The regulator must stop being soft on these discos. The regulator has to require that the discos be properly capitalized. If they are not capitalized, then the loans that have already been given to them have to be turned to equity, which will inevitably mean that the Nigerian people will end up owning back those discos, and then we can find proper investors instead of dealing with what even the white paper from the office or from the presidency have now termed failed investors continue to scam the Nigerian people while they leave us in darkness and our economies in doldrums, and then we cannot get out of this logjam. I think it's high time that the NERC step up and do its job.
Now, there's always been this argument by the distribution companies where, they are private investors about cost-reflective tariff. They've always had this argument that there's supposed to be a review even at a particular time. Now, let's look at what they've done and also on the side of government. Have they actually honored this agreement? Because the government also have a role to play in this agreement. The discos don't have 100% of all of these facilities. So now, what about government? Are they playing their role in as much as we know the discos are also not doing what they are supposed to do 100%?
The argument from the discos sounds like crickets to me. You claim that you are supposed to be charging 60, 70 naira, but today you are only allowed to charge 39 naira. And of that 39 naira you are being allowed to charge, you are only able to collect between 14% and 50% of the money that you are supposed to collect back. So even on the aggregate, you are technically, after you are allowed to collect 39 naira, you are collecting anything from it. When you take the average, you're collecting maybe 15 to 20 naira because you did not do your job. So are you going to blame government for not doing your job of metering? Are you going to blame the government for not ensuring that all your customers, to the extent that the government has to even give you an instruction to come and meter us, one of your biggest customers, the barracks, the MDAs, all the government establishments? The government have to send you an instruction, come and meter us so that we can pay you the tariff of today. So the argument that this cost-reflective thing holds no waters. The first thing you need to do is that the 39 naira you are being asked, or the 35 to 40 naira you are being allowed to collect from residential, and maybe up to 50 naira from industrial customers, collect what you are owed today, 100%. Today they are not able to do that. They are not even collecting 50. Most of the discos are not getting up to 50% of what they should be collecting. And then they are now complaining about cost-reflective tax. Talking about the government, I think The biggest blame of the government, if you ask me, is not even whether the government have raised tariff or not raised tariff, because as I've already broken down the argument, whether the government raised the tariff or not, the discos are not even collecting what they are due today because they don't want to do it, and because they're enjoying some kind of largesse. In fact, the government paper came out earlier this year where the Minister of Power then Power, Works and Housing actually made the argument that the discos are keeping more than what is due them, even under the elevated tariff. So the argument that they are not allowed to charge elevated tariff is cricket. Now, the biggest blame of the government, let me get to it, is not the issue of tariff or the government being able to raise tariff. We know the last government actually was supposed to raise tariff at one point and backed out from doing it because of political reasons. Now I believe those tariffs were finally being implemented as of last week when the NERC came out with a new tariff, and it will be further reviewed in 2020. That is not the biggest problem of the government. The biggest problem the government have had, if you ask me, is actually the fact that the government have not regulated the sector. The power sector all over the world is regulated. And the number one work of the government in a privatized environment goes from just doing things as a shareholder, as a minority shareholder, which it is under most of the discos, and definitely where it is not even a shareholder in most of the gencos. What the government now needs to do is to be a regulator. And the NERC, I have to say over and over again, that the NERC has been a weak regulator. The NERC has not done its job. It has not served the Nigerian people well. The NERC are prevaricated in ensuring and bringing down the big armor to ensure that these discos that have failed in their responsibilities, they lose their license. And when they lose their license, they cannot operate. Okay. So it's as simple as that. And then what we have to do, there needs to be some stopgap. So the government's fault here is that of regulation. It's the biggest problem that we have right now. We need the NERC for the sake of Nigerian businesses, for the sake of Nigerian people, for the sake of our democracy and our economy. We need the NERC to step up and do its job.
Mr. Michael, some would argue that, yes, you're talking about NERC now doing what it's supposed to do as a regulator, but some would say that this sector has been neglected for some time, years without investment in this sector before the privatization process came on board. So many are saying that Rome was not built in a day, that we shouldn't just expect that under a few months or few years, we could change the hands of time, like generating close to 10,000 or 15,000 megawatts. They say it should be a gradual process. That's another argument. I don't know what you make of that.
It's ridiculous. If you permit me to take you on a trip to Cairo, Cairo is building a new capital. And under a deal that was signed with Siemens, Cairo was able to build 5,000 megawatt power station, 5,500 megawatt power station in New Cairo that has residents of maybe 200 people within a period of 18 months. Are you telling me that the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the largest gas producer in Africa, one of the largest crude oil producer in Africa, is not able to do the same? Are you telling me with our vast hydro power sources, with a massive TCN transmission infrastructure, with our massive distribution infrastructure, we're not able to do the same within 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're still counting years? That argument is ridiculous. What we are seeing here is the fact that the people that are responsible for ensuring that the public interest is upheld, first and foremost, the NERC is not doing its job. And the people that we brought in to supposedly invest in the sector, the discos, they are failed. So what we need to do at this time is to declare a power emergency. We need a power emergency to be declared. We need the president and we need the power task force that is under the Minister of Power to be able to take drastic steps. And those drastic steps include requiring that all the discos who have bought assets in this country be properly capitalized. We need to see their books. They need to publish their books. They need to open their books to the NERC, just like the way the banks were recapitalized. They need to be forced to recapitalize. And if anybody doesn't recapitalize, you lose your license. And when you lose your license, we have government entities like the BPE take over, look at your books, turn some of the loans back to equity, and then Nigerian people can start enjoying power. Maybe we need to find new investors. But first and foremost, the failed investors have to be expelled from the system. We have no two ways about this. Nigerian people are suffering. They need power. And the only way to do this is to ensure the NERC does its job. And that is very basic.
Mr. Michael, before I let you go, just in 1 minute, say more about this strategy in details that you think will give us this effectiveness. That's talking about the demand center project focus.
Absolutely. So there's a very simple set of strategy that we need to focus on. Number one, 50% of Nigerians live in the urban areas, and half of those people live in about 13 cities in Nigeria. The reality is that these cities are the engine room of our economic growth. So what we need to do is to produce power for those cities. What we have done today is to spread our infrastructure thin. All across the country, we have about 10, 20 gas-fired power stations, 10 of them under the NDPHC, and then we have various others like Girigou and Mambila, and all of these projects being developed. But we need to think first and foremost about these economic centers, these 13 to 15 cities, where most economic production in Nigeria takes place, and then ensure that we provide these cities power. We need to ensure that we connect the generation directly to the distribution. This whole idea of putting power into the long transmission cables where you are going to experience power losses, this any engineer will tell you is the basic I2R losses that you experience when you put a power on a transmission cable over long distances. So what we need to do is to focus this generation. For example, Aba IPP should be focused on the city of Aba. The city of Aba produces millions of jobs. So for us, the most important thing is to get Aba power. So we should take Aba IPP, Calabar IPP, and we should focus on Aba and Port Harcourt. And we should ensure everybody in Port Harcourt is metered. And ensure that once this metering is done, the money comes back to the GENCO. The GENCO is able to expand their power base, and then they can go from 12 hours of electricity to 18 hours of electricity to 20 hours of electricity to 24 hours of electricity. And then we need to now look at it and say, okay, fine. We now have rural areas also that are also engine room of growth. By this I mean a lot of the state capitals across Nigeria, they need constant power. So we need to find the closest generating stations around these 36 state capitals where they are not among the 13 I mentioned already, and ensure we also get them power. We also need to look at economic centers like our universities. I think some of this program is being done by the Energized Grid program that is under the Rural Electrification Agency. But for that program, for example, we've borrowed Green Bond to actually build some of these solar, off-grid solar power stations, but nobody is metering them so that the universities can return the money. So are we providing free power to our universities? That is not economically viable. We need to ensure that those universities are metered so that by the time we need to change the batteries that is present in all of these 36 universities that is captured under this program, we have money to change them. We don't then go outside again to go and start looking for intervention funds, subsidies to buy new batteries for these universities in 5 to 6 years' time. So we need to think about sustainability, but we also, more importantly, need to focus our project generation directly to distribution on key demand centers that are going to drive the engine room of Nigerian growth. We are talking about 50 cities at most, and maybe 36 universities. And immediately, when they start experiencing constant electricity, jobs are going to be produced, and then you can actually relieve our rural areas that then can be on the grid. The broader grid solutions like Mambila, KNG, and Shiroro can produce cheap power for our rural areas. So this strategy is a strategy that needs to be focused on the outcome. When you focus on the outcome and stop focusing on all these fluffy things, but focus on the outcome of providing power for where it is needed, and we're going to get the most return for our buck. And
Mr.
I think
Michael Oluwagbemi, I see that
passion
passion there. It's always very interesting when we discuss power because it's really pivotal to the development of any economy, and Nigeria cannot be left out. Thank you very much for your time. Live there, Mr. Michael Oluwagbemi is an energy analyst speaking passionately about the positives and how we can get it right in that sector.